It's just how I was born. I've always been slow. You've heard things like this at least once, right? In fact, if you're someone who's slow to begin with, you probably wouldn't even dare to try running fast in situations like a 100-meter dash. But you often hear these kinds of comments among people who enjoy various sports like soccer, basketball, or tennis. Things like, I'm naturally slow, so I can't keep up with that. I just can't run. You hear things like this quite often. Sometimes people say it as if they're victims, like there's nothing they can do about it. When you hear that, you just think, oh, I see. You might even feel a bit sorry for them. But in reality, no one says, well, since you weren't born with it, I'll give you an extra point, or you did your best, so that's good enough to pass. In the real world, people judge you coldly based only on the results. On the other hand, there are also people who say things like this. Is there really any need to run fast? Isn't being good at handling the ball much more important? There are people who say things like this too. Of course, if your ball control skills are outstanding, you might be able to win without moving much at all. But that's only when you're up against someone whose skills are overwhelmingly lower than yours. In the end, speed and agility, these are the foundations of sports, and how you move your body determines your performance. So here's an important question. Speed, agility, explosiveness. We tend to think these things are important if you want to be good at sport. So where do these abilities actually come from, and how can we improve them? This isn't a question that can be answered so simply. It's a topic that requires a lot of explanation, and you'll also need time to apply what you learn. Starting today, I'll reveal the secrets to you in 10 steps. Here's how the content is organized. There are a few key points I've shared with people who come to me worried about being slow and sluggish, and today I'll reveal all the secrets. I'm confident that if you go through them one by one and follow along, anyone can develop a fast and agile body. All right, now let's get started in earnest and dive into today's main topic, pushing and the core principles behind this concept. The concept and basic principles of pushing. Now, I'm going to tell you how to actually get faster. The first key point is pushing. So, what is the core principle here? Running speed largely depends on how strongly you push off the ground. But it's not about how hard you push. It's about the direction in which that force is delivered. The key element here is this. It's your toes. When you bend your toes properly and press against the ground, the angle of your leg becomes closer to horizontal with the ground, allowing you to push your body forward more effectively. If you don't use your toes properly, the angle of your leg stays too vertical, so the force isn't delivered correctly and your posture ends up unstable, almost as if you're bouncing upward. This concept is called ground reaction force. When we apply force to the ground pushes our body back as a reaction. Naturally, the stronger that force is, the faster you'll become. But it's not just about applying force as hard as you can. The direction of that force also needs to be appropriate, and that's an important point. Just how important this direction is, you can clearly see by comparing two different running forms. Whether it's a marathon or a short distance sprint, if you look closely at how athletes run, their hip joints are also fully extended. Their knees are straightened, and so are their ankles. They press the ground firmly with their back toes, making their legs almost parallel to the ground. This is the secret to explosively propelling the body forward at speed. However, if you look at the running form of people who enjoy running or sports as a hobby and say they are slow runners, their hip joints do not extend far enough backward. As a result, their legs are positioned almost vertically to the ground. What happens if you try to push off the ground forcefully from this position? Of course, since you're using a lot of force, your speed will increase to some extent, but you'll end up bouncing up and down as if you're jumping. Your forward running speed will inevitably be lower compared to the amount of force you're exerting. This is not an ideal situation. Some of you might be thinking, who would run in such a strange way? Of course, I exaggerated my posture a bit to clearly show the difference, so in reality, you wouldn't see anyone jumping that excessively upward. But when I've met many people and asked them, could you try running as fast as you can? When I say this, surprisingly, I often see people with a posture that looks like they're bouncing upward. In fact, before I learned how to run properly, I used to run with that kind of feeling too. Even among those I teach, many of them start out that way. So I wondered why people tend to bounce upward like that. To achieve this posture, you have to bend your toes enough and send your leg far back. To do that, it's inevitably much more unstable than the typical running posture we usually see. It also inevitably requires much more strength. That extra strength comes from what's called the triple extension. What is triple extension, you ask? It refers to the explosive movement where the hip, knee, and ankle joints are rapidly extended at the same time. And through this, you generate explosive propulsion throughout your entire body. Whether you're running forward or jumping upward, it's the same. If you can't fully unleash this explosive power, you won't be able to push the ground forward. Let me show you a strengthening exercise to help you develop this sensation. It's called the sergeant jump. It's a movement where you jump as high as you can. Through this kind of jump, you can practice the powerful force of triple extension. If you quickly crouch down and then stand up just as fast, you'll feel that burst of speed and power. Try it once and then use that sensation when you run. You'll feel powerful strength and impressive speed. But let me ask you a question here. Is simply performing a triple extension, that is, quickly extending all three joints, enough to solve everything and make you run faster? Actually, there are some more detailed points you need to pay attention to. Today's topic is about pushing, right? So, in order to push the ground powerfully, your foot always needs to be in contact with the ground. How you use that foot, depending on the method, can make a huge difference. Whether it's running or jumping, you need to pay attention to the details of your footwork and use your feet properly. If you use your feet well, it not only helps improve your speed, but when you move at high speed and exert strong force like this, a tremendous amount of pressure is placed on your feet. And there are various injuries and discomforts related to the feet that can occur. But by using your feet properly, you can also prevent such injuries. The role of the feet is not simply limited to just touching the ground. Earlier, I briefly mentioned how to use your toes. But to properly transfer force and generate greater power and faster speed, you need to understand in detail the subtle movements of the feet and how to distribute your weight correctly. So next, let's take a closer look at the specific ways to use your feet as well as exercises to strengthen them, the structure and usage of the feet. First, we need to look at what the foot actually looks like. If we examine the distinctive structure of the foot, it is made up of three arch structures: the transverse arch, the medial longitudinal arch, and the lateral longitudinal arch. This means that the foot isn't flat, but is slightly concave. Of course, it's a bit different in the case of flat feet, but basically the foot is formed in this concave arch shape. And it's not that the foot always stays concave either. When the foot needs to absorb shock as you step down, it becomes a bit flatter. And then when you need to generate strong propulsion to push off the ground, the arch becomes concave again. If the arches of the foot function properly like this, there are two important functions of the foot. One is absorbing shock when running or jumping, and the other is generating strong propulsion by creating elasticity again. These two functions can be properly utilized. Along with the basic structure of the foot, elastic tissues like the plantar fascia on the sole and the Achilles tendon at the heel help support these two roles. So how should you use your feet? Actually, if I just explain the method in words, it's quite simple. When you run, the leg that was in the air lands on the ground. At the moment your foot touches the ground, it first lands on the side of the little toe. As your leg moves backward and your foot leaves the ground, you should shift your weight to the inside of your big toe, and finally, you need to push off the ground by bending your toes. You need to be aware of how your weight is distributed across your foot and which parts you should be applying force to, and then use the strong power of your feet to push off the ground. I'll also introduce various training methods to help you accurately recognize and strengthen these aspects. So far, I've talked about a lot of concepts. For those of you who don't care about theory or anything else and just want to know the method so you can follow along, it's actually enough to just watch the video from this part onward. Even if you just watch and follow along, you'll be able to get much faster than before. Let's start with the movement that helps you get a feel for how to use your feet. As I mentioned earlier, try standing while supporting your weight on one leg. At this point, focus on the sensation in your foot. You're supporting your weight with your foot. You should be able to feel your weight being supported on the outer edge of your foot, near your pinky toe. Now let's try holding your weight on each foot for 10 seconds like this. Simply holding this position can naturally provide some exercise. However, if you stay still, some people may notice that instead of supporting their weight on the outer edge near the pinky toe, they actually feel the weight shifting to the inner side of the foot, near the big toe. To further explain how to use the pinky toe side more and increase the intensity of the exercise by moving a bit more, keep your weight supported on one leg, maintaining this posture as it is. Then twist your body slightly to the side of the supporting leg. When you twist your body like this, you'll feel more of your weight shifting to the outer side of your foot, toward the pinky toe. Because you're standing on a slightly smaller area than your whole foot, your foot will start to move and you'll feel the muscles on the outside of your foot and your calf engaging. Naturally, this will help you strengthen those areas. Let's repeat this 10 times on each side. So we've just practiced exercising the outer part of the foot near the pinky toe. Now we're going to work on the inner muscles of the foot near the big toe. First, let's get a sense of what it feels like to support yourself on the inner side of your foot. Earlier, we were standing while supporting our weight on one leg. This time, let's stand with both legs spread wide apart to the side. If you stand like this, you'll notice a slightly different sensation in your feet compared to when you were standing on one leg. Your weight will be placed on the inner side of your foot, near the big toe. As I mentioned earlier, for those whose weight-bearing and foot movement patterns have already collapsed, sometimes the weight is supported on the outer side of the foot. Try to support your weight well on the inner side of your foot, near the big toe. From that position, try lifting your heel and pushing the ground away with the front part of your foot near the big toe. First, get used to this sensation. Try pushing to the left and then to the right as well and get a feel for your feet. This way, you'll be able to feel the strength coming into the inner side of your foot. In addition, if you want to make it a bit more intense and actually exercise, the exercise to strengthen this area is simple. You've probably tried it at least once before. It's commonly known as PT calisthenics. Let's focus on the movement of the feet. You spread your legs wide apart, and then you bring them back together. The movement of bringing your legs back together after spreading them wide, this is the key point. Make sure to spread your feet wide enough. Then, using the inside of your feet to push against the ground, you need to quickly bring both feet together using the strength from the inner part of your feet. Usually when doing standard PT exercises, this movement isn't performed that quickly. But if you have enough strength in your feet and want to exercise more intensely, you should perform the movement of spreading your feet wide and then bringing them back together as quickly as possible. Since it's not that difficult, let's count one repetition as spreading your feet and then bringing them back together and try repeating this 50 times. You should be able to feel the tension in the inner part of your soles. There's a muscle called the abductor hallucis that's connected to the big toe, and this muscle is actually located on the outer part of the calf. You should also be able to feel tension in this area. Basically, the muscles in your calves will also be working quite a lot. So we've now felt the sensations from the outside of the foot to the inside, and we've also tried some light exercises. Finally, I'll show you the key point of pushing off the ground with your toes just before your foot leaves the ground. Stand facing a wall, step back a little, place your hands on the wall, and lean your whole body forward so that it's tilted about 45 degrees. In that position, lift and lower your heels, getting used to the sensation of pushing the ground with your toes bent. Let's repeat this movement 20 times. The important point when doing this movement is this. You need to focus your strength on your ankles and toes. But often that's not the case. Many people end up bending and straightening their knees, putting force on them, so make sure to keep your knees as still as possible to prevent any movement. Now, this movement where you use strength from the outer edge of your entire foot to the inner part and even your toes is called the Hogio jump. I recommend this movement. It's a jump where you lightly bounce off the ground as if you're skipping rope and then occasionally jump as high as you can. There's a key point you need to pay attention to at the moment you jump high. You should minimize the amount of time your feet touch the ground and jump up as quickly as possible the moment your feet make contact. At the same time, you need to focus on the sensation of using your entire foot and really emphasize that point. When your foot touches the ground, you should land on the side of your little toe. Next, as you move toward your big toe and bend your toes, you'll feel a lot of force, especially in the front of your shin, your calf, and the sole of your foot, right up to the point where you finally push off the ground. If you incorporate this jumping point into your running, you'll be able to generate a very powerful and springy force. And there's also the sergeant jump movement I mentioned earlier. It's the same when you do this movement. Swing your arms far back and then explosively bend down and stand up. The movement at the hip joint is also a crucial point where you need to use a lot of strength. In any case, to generate more power, you need to make sure that when your foot touches the ground, you use the entire foot evenly, from the little toe side, through the big toe, and finally all your toes. Let's slowly repeat this movement 10 times. Everything I've shown you so far are methods you can easily do on your own. If you have equipment like this, or a sturdy resistance band and a place to secure it, or even a workout partner, you can do strengthening exercises that closely resemble running form. Especially since this exercise is very similar to the running motion, many people find that after doing it, they can push off the ground more powerfully and run much better. So just by paying close attention to the point of pushing off the ground like this, you'll definitely notice a clear difference compared to when you used to run without thinking, just trying to go faster. Today we talked about the very important aspect of pushing and running. How should you push off the ground? We also went over strengthening exercises in detail. If you practice this thoroughly, your running, speed, and agility will definitely improve. Even just with what I shared today, you should see a lot of improvement. There are still many more tips that can help you boost your speed and agility. If you want to keep up with these updates and make sure you're applying them well, hit subscribe so you can get the next videos quickly. Don't just watch, make sure to try them out yourself and experience the benefits firsthand. And please look forward to the content coming up next. If there's anything from today's content or concepts that you don't understand, or if something doesn't work well when you try it, please leave a comment. In the next video, we'll cover the second part, how to lift your legs, with a more detailed explanation and even some strengthening exercises. If you can't perform the leg lifting movement properly, you might end up running in a very unstable posture, almost as if you're about to fall. The second part will cover how to solve that problem.